I returned to the Potteries in 1897, and again in December 1903, both times for family reasons. In '03, I spent an evening at the Grand Theatre, Hanley, which hadn't been built when I lived here. I could only remember sing-songs conducted by convivial chairmen with rapping hammers in public houses whose blinds were drawn and whose posters were handwritten. Now I saw an immense carved and gilded interior, like a smaller version of the Paris Opera. My first thought was, why, it's just like a real music hall. I only thought of Hanley as a place where people went to work at 7 in the morning and emerged from public houses at 11 at night, or mournful in packed tramcars, or bitterly partisan on chilly football grounds. I could scarcely credit their appearance here, lolling on velvet amid Cupids and Hercules, and smoking at ease, reclining aristocratically in the grand circle for a bob, and offered chocolates by boys dressed as if to go to Eton. And there was a vast gallery stuffed with human tuppences. Even the newspaper lad and match girl might go to the Hanley Grand, and, sitting together, drink the milk of paradise. Wonderful discoveries, these new music hall directors. They have discovered the folk. The performance was timed as carefully as a prize fight. Ting, and the curtain went unfailingly up. Ting, and it came unfailingly down. Ting, and something started. Ting, and it stopped. Everybody concerned with the show knew what he and everybody else had to do. The illuminated number signs on either side of the proscenium changed themselves with the implacable accuracy of astronomical phenomena. It was just as if some deity of 10,000 syndicated halls was controlling the show from some throne studded with electric switches in Shaftesbury Avenue. Only the uniformed shepherd of the tuppences in the gallery seemed free to use his own discretion. His intimidating, "Now then, order, please," was the sole feature of the entertainment, not regulated to the 1/5 of a second by that recurrent ting. And the entertainment. A young woman in a short skirt chanted of being clasped in his arms again. A couple of acrobatic mulatto women throbbed with bodily fever. Male acrobats gave a continual creation of sheer animal beauty. But I was waiting for the Yorkshire songsters, second item in the second half. There were 20 of them standing in a sort of flattened semicircle, the women in white and the men in scarlet hunting coats, with the conductor in knee breeches and silk stockings. Ordinary northern men and women, you could tell that, but they had class. They could really sing. They really had voices. They brought the house down every time. It was the folk themselves giving something back to the folk in artistic form. But the most touching item for me was a lady clog dancer. Hanley was the centre of a land of clogs. I've wakened in winter darkness to the sound of clogs on slushy pavements. And when I think of clogs, I think of the knocker-up, and hurried fire-lighting, and tea and thick bread, and the factory gates, and the terrible timekeeper standing there with his clock. Now clogs have nearly gone out of the working life, but here they reappear in clog dancing, once done in public houses by people who next morning would clatter to work in clogs. As I lumbered home in the electric tramcar, besieged by printed requests from the tramway company not on any account to spit, I could not help thinking and thinking in a very trite way that art is a wonderful thing. I was thankful to leave after my visit home. More short stories followed, another Five Towns novel, Whom God Hath Joined, and then my great work, The Old Wives' Tale. As long as A Man from the North, Anna, and Leonora all added together, it is a prodigious canvas, all about the Five Towns. After a sort of impulse to quit those towns, I found myself going back to them. I may tell you that I have no intention of sticking exclusively to the Five Towns. I often feel that I am short of room there. The idea for the great work had come to me 5 years before.
The Journals, 18th of November, 1903.
Last night, when I went into the Duval for dinner, a middle-aged woman, inordinately stout and with pendant cheeks, had taken the seat opposite to my prescriptive seat. The fat woman was clearly a crotchet, a maniac, a woman who lived much alone. She was repulsive. No one could like or sympathize with her. But I thought, she has been young and slim once. And I immediately thought of a long 10 or 15,000 word short story, the history of two old women. I gave this woman a sister, fat as herself, and the first chapter would be in the restaurant, both sisters, something like tonight, and written rather cruelly. Then I would go back to the infancy of these two, and sketch it all. One should have lived ordinarily, married prosaically, and become a widow. The other should have become a whore and all that, guilty splendor. Both are overtaken by fat, and they live together again in old age, not too rich, a nuisance to themselves and to others. The two lives would have to intertwine. I saw the whole work quite clearly. 10 or 15,000 words. On Sunday, the 30th of August, 1908, it was finished at 200,000 words. The book soon went out of print in England, but the American critics acclaimed it, and I am famous. In old age, the two sisters, Constance and Sophia, end up together, and turn out to have lived the same life, despite their different paths. They are as they are because they live here.
Who could have foreseen it? Constance was less desolated than numbed. She was as yet only touching the fringe of her bereavement. She had not begun to think of herself. She was drenched as she gazed at Sophia's body, not by pity for herself, but by compassion for the immense disaster of her sister's life. She perceived fully now, for the first time, the greatness of that disaster. Sophia's charm and Sophia's beauty, what profit had they been to their owner? She saw pictures of Sophia's career, distorted and grotesque images formed in her untravelled mind from Sophia's own rare and compressed recitals. What a career! A brief passion, and then nearly 30 years in a boarding-house. And Sophia had never had a child, had never known either the joy or the pain of maternity. She had never even had a true home till, in all her sterile splendour, she came to Bursley, and she had ended thus. This was the piteous, ignominious end of Sophia's wondrous gifts of body and soul. Hers had not been a life at all. And the reason? It is strange how fate persists in justifying the harsh generalizations of Puritan morals, of the morals in which Constance had been brought up by her stern parents. Sophia had sinned. It was therefore inevitable that she should suffer. An adventure such as she had in wicked and capricious pride undertaken with Gerald Scales could not conclude otherwise than it had concluded. It could have brought nothing but evil. But look at her now, with her twisted face, her sightless orbs, her worn skin. She did not seem 60, but 70. She was like something used, exhausted, and thrown aside. Yes, Constance's heart melted in an anguished pity for that stormy creature, and mingled with the pity was a stern recognition of the handiwork of divine justice. To Constance's lips came the same phrase as had come to the lips of Samuel Povey on a different occasion: God is not mocked. The ideas of her parents and her grandparents had survived intact in Constance. It is true that Constance's father would have shuddered in heaven could he have seen Constance solitarily playing cards of a night. But in spite of cards, and of a son who never went to chapel, Constance, under the various influences of her destiny, had remained essentially what her father had been. Not in her was the force of evolution manifest. There are thousands such.
And with Constance's own death...
The immortal Charles Critchlow came to the funeral full of calm, sardonic glee, and without being asked. Though fabulously senile, he had preserved and even improved his faculty for enjoying a catastrophe. He now went to funerals with gusto, contentedly absorbed in the task of burying his friends one by one. It was he who said, in his high, trembling, rasping, deliberate voice,
"It's a pity I didn't live long enough to hear his federations going on after all. That would have warranted it."
That day's signal was fuller than ever of federation.
There followed Clayhanger, where Edwin's schooldays were modelled on my own, then Hilda Lessways, and the card.
The ball at the town hall. Denry Machin has accepted a bet of £5 that he daren't ask the Countess of Chell for a dance. "Could I have this dance with you?" he demanded of the Countess, bluntly, but smiling and showing his teeth. No ceremonial title, no mention of pleasure or honour, not a trace of the formula in which Ruth Earp had instructed him. He forgot all such trivialities. "I've won that £5, Mr. Harold Itches," he said to himself. "It's nearly over, isn't it?" said the Countess, still efficiently smiling. "Oh, that doesn't matter, I'm sure," said Denry. She yielded, and he took the paradisiacal creature in his arms. Thus they waltzed together, while the flower of Bursley's chivalry gazed in enchantment. "You waltz quite nicely," she said, like an aunt, but with more than an aunt's smile. "Do I?" he beamed. Then something compelled him to say, "Do you know, it's the first time I've ever waltzed in my life, except in a lesson, you know." "Really?" she murmured. "You pick things up easily, I suppose." "Yes," he said. "Do you?" Either the question or the tone sent the Countess off into carillons of amusement. Everybody could see that Denry had made the Countess laugh tremendously. It was on this note that the waltz finished. She was still laughing when he bowed to her, as taught by Ruth Earp. He laughed too, and they parted laughing. When he had got 10 yards on his way towards Harold Itches and a £5, he felt something in his hand. The Countess's fan was sticking between his fingers. It had unhooked itself from her chain. He furtively pocketed it. Towards the end of the festivity, the rumour floated abroad that the Countess had lost her fan. The rumour reached Denry, who maintained a culpable silence. But when all was over, and the Countess was departing, he rushed down after her, and in a dramatic fashion which demonstrated his genius for the effective, he caught her exactly as she was getting into her carriage. "I've just picked it up," he said, pushing through the crowd of worshippers. "Oh, thank you very much," she said, and the Earl also thanked Denry. And then the Countess, leaning from the carriage, said, with archness in her efficient smile, "You do pick things up easily, don't you?" And both Denry and the Countess laughed without restraint, and the pillars of Bursley society were mystified.
And that is when I fell foul of the Duchess of Sutherland, whom people thought I'd taken as a model for the Countess of Chell. I wrote to her, "Dear lady, I admit that this is a bit rough on you. But then, as I told you, you are to consider yourself in the Five Towns not as a woman, but as an institution. This also is a bit rough on a beautiful woman. Believe me, with a peculiar kind of glance which is at once admiring, apologetic, and unrepentant, yours sincerely, Arnold Bennett."
"Well," said Denry in reply to Nellie's conscience, "it serves him right for making me look a fool. And besides, I can't stand uppishness. And I won't. I'm from the Five Towns, I am."
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Le moment. Bravo! Un jour de gloire est arrivé. Bravo.
I want to explain the reason I'm here is that I'm a devotee of Arnold Bennett, and particularly The Old Wives' Tale. I've been saying for some 30 or more years this is the best novel by an Englishman written in the 20th century. My parents lived in Chiltern Court, and so I was brought up in Chiltern Court. And our eldest son, my wife and my eldest son, is called Bennett. So I'm thrilled to be here. But you should be so proud, members of the Society, of what you've achieved. This is a beautiful plaque. Actually created in exactly the right workshops, in exactly the right pottery. And it just is, it's fantastic. And just imagine what it must be like to be an English person just driving along this little side street here in this beautiful Avon, which is part of Fontainebleau now, which was a distinct town in Arnold Bennett's day. Just driving through here, getting to the corner and looking up and seeing this. I can tell you as an English person, it just, well actually it's very moving. And you've done it. You've actually made this happen. Members of the Society, 300 of you, good people. I salute you, and I'm sorry you had to be at your AGM in Stoke. Someone's got to be at an AGM, these things have to happen. But we feel very privileged to have been here at Avon, at the unveiling by Denis, grandson of the great man, and the cultural attaché, the sort of mayor's cultural representative, who really didn't know much about Arnold Bennett until this came up, but was really engaged. And her speech was particularly fascinating because she said, one of the lines, in case you missed it, was that she said that as a woman over 40, she was particularly interested in Arnold Bennett because the one thing she had absorbed is that he was somebody, in fact, the writer who seemed to understand women over 40. So as far as she was concerned, he had to be a good egg. And as far as we are concerned, he has to be a very good egg, and not only when he's in an omelette, but particularly when he's within a great work of art, which is The Old Wives' Tale. Thank you. Well done, you. Good night.